For centuries, humanity has spoken of lost temples, structures erected to honor divine forces that don't fit into the official narrative of history. Some have been found and cataloged as simple ruins of ancient civilizations, but others remain only legends, mentioned in fragmented manuscripts or preserved in oral traditions that have spanned generations. Among these mysteries, there is one that has always caused discomfort even among archaeologists and historians, the so-called Temple of the Forbidden Gods, a structure that, according to scattered reports, was erected not to celebrate known deities, but rather to house entities that should remain forgotten. For a long time, it was believed that this story was nothing more than a fabrication, a myth created to frighten simpler people and keep them away from certain places considered dangerous. However, new evidence suggests that something different is happening, and the question no one wanted to face now arises: has this temple really been discovered? The issue is not only archaeological, but also symbolic. When we speak of hidden temples, we speak of hidden knowledge, of truths that were deliberately buried so as not to come to light. If a structure truly exists that was intentionally erased from historical records, we must ask ourselves, why? What was so disturbing about its existence that entire generations worked in silence to ensure nothing was remembered? These questions grow even more acute when we consider that recent excavations in remote regions have brought to the surface remains that seem to correspond to this ancient myth. Sealed underground structures, symbols that don't fit any local tradition, and passages described as stone corridors carefully hidden beneath layers of sand and rock. All of this points to something greater than mere coincidence. The mystery gains momentum because it's not just about stacked stones or worn inscriptions. The accounts describe symbols that don't belong to any known alphabet, drawings of beings that don't correspond to the traditional iconography of recorded civilizations, and an aura of strangeness that manifests itself even in the testimonies of those who had direct contact with the site. Archaeologists report the sensation of being before something that shouldn't exist, something that directly challenges the timeline accepted by science. And when science is faced with something that threatens its very foundations, the natural reaction is denial. But the more we deny, the more doubt grows. What if it's real? What if, after all, the hidden temple of the Forbidden Gods has always been there, waiting to be revealed? This is the enigma that challenges archaeology today and that calls into question the line between myth and reality. The existence of this temple is not just a historical curiosity. It is a threat to the way we understand our own origins. And that is why, more than ever, we need to look at these signs seriously. For perhaps what is hidden was not forgotten by accident, but preserved on purpose. The hidden temple didn't appear before the world's eyes amid bustling cities or already explored tourist sites. Its presence was revealed in a remote region, marked by vast expanses of rock and sand, where the silence of the landscape seems to have hidden secrets for thousands of years. There, far from traditional maps and tourist routes, only a few local communities knew the rumors of ancient structures resting underground. For them, it was not just a legend, but a warning. Stories of travelers who became lost while trying to explore the caves, reports of unexplained sounds coming from underground, and symbols engraved on stones that have never been understood. This was the backdrop surrounding the area before archaeologists decided to begin a systematic investigation. The first expeditions were not motivated by a direct interest in finding forgotten temples, but rather by curiosity surrounding inscriptions left on loose stones on the surface. These fragments, seemingly out of context, showed engravings unlike anything previously cataloged in the region. While most known civilizations use stylized human or animal figures, these inscriptions revealed beings that seemed hybrids, half man, half creature, with distorted proportions that defied logic. What seemed like merely an archaeological detail ended up attracting a group of independent researchers willing to pursue clues that traditional academia ignored. As the excavations progressed, the first signs emerged that something monumental lay hidden beneath layers of earth. Rectangular structures appeared too precisely to be natural formations. Geometrically fitted stones, partially collapsed passageways, and sealed underground chambers pointed to a deliberate construction crafted with advanced architectural knowledge. Most disturbing, however, was the sense that this structure had not simply been forgotten by time, but deliberately hidden. As if, at some point in history, human hands or unknown forces had worked to conceal every trace of this temple. The physical setting of the discovery heightened the psychological impact. The walls, when first cleaned, showed not only signs of erosion but also marks of fire and deliberate destruction. It was as if the temple had been attacked and sealed, perhaps by later peoples who feared what was worshipped there. This atmosphere of intentional concealment carried enormous symbolic weight. Why would anyone go to such pains to ensure that nothing from there ever came to light? With every meter of excavation, the doubt deepened. But what truly transformed the discovery into a puzzle that defies archaeology was the set of symbols found on the interior walls. Unlike Egyptian hieroglyphics or Mesopotamian pictograms, these signs followed complex geometric patterns, almost like mathematical codes mixed with representations of unknown beings. For the archaeologists, there was no clear reference in known history. For the locals, it was simply a warning, a reminder that some doors should never be opened. It was in this setting, a desert of silence, stones concealing forbidden stories, and symbols unparalleled in archaeology, that the possibility arose that the hidden temple truly existed. And the more was discovered, the more inescapable the feeling that humanity was confronted with something that should never have been found. No archaeological discovery exists without those who dare to challenge the unknown. In the case of the hidden temple, the protagonists were not large government-funded institutions, but rather a group of independent researchers, restless archaeologists, and explorers who shared the courage to go beyond what academic textbooks considered acceptable. Among them were scholars whose careers were marked by criticism, often because they followed alternative paths, preferring to investigate local legends and forgotten manuscripts rather than repeat established theories. These men and women were driven by something greater than mere academic prestige. They sought answers to questions that science avoided asking. The expedition leader was a middle-aged archaeologist, renowned for some minor discoveries at historic sites, but also marked by controversy. He firmly believed that humanity's greatest secrets lay not in museums, but buried beneath layers of silence and censorship. His career had often been boycotted by colleagues who accused him of sensationalism. Yet he never backed down, and each defeat only strengthened his resolve. Beside him was a linguist specializing in archaic symbols, a woman who had dedicated years of her life to deciphering seemingly indecipherable codes, often dismissed as meaningless squiggles by major research centers. The group also included young researchers who saw this expedition as an opportunity to connect with something grand, perhaps a chance to be part of history. Unlike typical academic projects, where every step is bureaucratically documented, there was something visceral about this journey, a desire to touch a living mystery. The atmosphere among them was one of curiosity, but also tension. None of them knew for sure what they would find beneath the sand and rock, but all carried the feeling that they were about to surpass a limit of human knowledge. The accounts that have come down to us about these protagonists describe not only their technical qualifications, but also their reactions to the inexplicable. Some were skeptical and tried to maintain logical reasoning, even though the environment challenged them at every turn. Others, more sensitive, admitted to feeling a strange presence in the place, as if they were being watched. This blend of scientific rationality and spiritual intuition created a curious balance. While some measured each stone, others wondered if they were not facing something that transcended the very notion of archaeology. What made these protagonists unique was not only their competence, but the fact that they were not bound by the obligation to provide immediate explanations. They could allow themselves to observe, feel, record, and question without the pressure of fitting everything into pre-existing manuals. This gave them freedom, but also put them at risk. For the further they advanced in their investigation, the more they realized that it was not only science that opposed what they were about to reveal. Invisible forces, social or spiritual, seemed to be working against them, as if someone or something wanted to ensure that the temple of the forbidden gods remained silent. The first weeks of excavation proceeded like any other archaeological project in unexplored territory. Dust blanketed everything. Endless hours of manual stone removal and the uncomfortable silence of nights in makeshift camps. But it was precisely in the midst of this exhausting routine that the first sign emerged that something was about to disrupt normality. One of the young researchers, while removing a seemingly ordinary block of rock, noticed markings engraved on the surface, almost invisible at first glance. In direct sunlight, the inscriptions went unnoticed, but in the dim light of the flashlights, they revealed complex geometric patterns, arranged as if fragments of a code. They weren't words in any known alphabet, nor were they naturalistic drawings. They were symbols repeated with precision, as if someone had intended to record a message not to be read, but to be deciphered on another level. The group gathered around the stone, and there arose the first collective sense that they were not just ordinary ruins. The team's linguist remained silent for long minutes, examining each line. Then she confessed that the symbols did not belong to any recorded writing system. Yet, there was a strange familiarity to them, as if they echoed forms seen in distant, disconnected cultures. This realization left everyone uneasy. How could a fragment lost in the desert bear markings that resembled inscriptions from places thousands of miles away? In the following days, other blocks revealed similar engravings. What had previously seemed like a fluke began to emerge as a pattern, and more disturbing than the symbols themselves were the circumstances in which they appeared, always on stones facing inward, as if someone had intentionally hidden the writing from outside view. It was as if the builders intended these messages to remain invisible until someone, centuries later, dared to break through the layers that protected them. This realization brought a mixture of fascination and fear. Fascination at imagining being confronted with a lost language. Fear at feeling that this language perhaps wasn't made for us for this time. But the strangest sign was yet to come. One early morning, while some team members were reviewing their notes and photographs, a sudden wind swept through the camp. Their lanterns flickered, and the silence of the desert was cut by a low, continuous sound like an underground echo. The next day, upon returning to the excavation area, they found one of the blocks displaced from its original position, partially revealing the entrance to a narrow corridor. No one admitted to having disturbed it during the night. The logical explanation would be a slight tremor or simply the natural shifting of the stone. Yet, for those present, the sensation was different, as if something had been released, or as if the temple itself had decided to reveal its first door. At that moment, the expedition ceased to be merely an archaeological investigation and began to carry the weight of the inexplicable. It was no longer just about ancient stones, but about signs that seemed to choose when and how to appear. The first clue was given. The hidden temple was beginning to reveal itself. When the first images and preliminary reports reached academic institutions, the reaction was not one of enthusiasm, but rather of resistance. For many experts, what the group had found was nothing more than natural erosion or marks carved by local peoples with no significant historical significance. They argued that it was premature to associate these symbols with a lost civilization or a religious temple. But something was even more troubling, the fact that the inscriptions didn't fit into any known chronology. If accepted as authentic, they would call into question the official archaeological timeline, suggesting impossible cultural contacts or a level of knowledge that shouldn't have existed at that time. This clash with the official narrative quickly turned into an invisible battle. On one side, independent researchers saw the find as a unique opportunity to rewrite part of history. On the other, established universities and institutions committed to preserving established boundaries. For traditional academics, accepting the temple's authenticity would mean admitting that centuries of research could be mistaken. For the explorers, denying it meant stifling the chance to shed light on one of humanity's greatest enigmas. The tension wasn't limited to scientific debates. Local newspapers, when they reported on the find, received discreet instructions not to pursue the case. Some articles were even withdrawn from circulation, as if under a veiled order to keep the matter hidden from the general public. This attitude only heightened suspicion that the hidden temple was not just an archaeological detail, but a secret too uncomfortable to expose. And the more silence was imposed, the greater the feeling that powerful forces were working to keep the discovery hidden. Within the expedition itself, the conflict also intensified. Some believed the best course of action would be to negotiate with universities, even if it meant softening the conclusions. Others argued that all material should be released unfiltered, no matter the cost. This internal conflict reflected the paradoxical nature of the discovery. While it promised recognition, it also carried the risk of isolation, ridicule, and even persecution. After all, disproving the official story is not just a matter of science, but of power. And it was in this scenario that the inevitable question arose: why was the temple called hidden and forbidden? The academic authorities' discomfort seemed to confirm the legend itself. What was hidden underground was dangerous not only because of its contents, but because it had the potential to destabilize the accepted version of our origins. The truth, it seemed, lay not only beneath ancient stones, but also beneath layers of human interests that have always determined what should be remembered and what should remain buried. When researchers finally gained access to the temple's first chambers, what they found surpassed all expectations. The walls were covered in symbols unlike anything cataloged in conventional archaeology. They weren't Egyptian hieroglyphics, Sumerian characters, or pictograms known from Andean or Mesoamerican peoples. They were complex geometric shapes, repeated with almost mathematical precision, as if expressing universal formulas or patterns rather than simple everyday writing. Some of these signs appeared to represent interlocking spirals, while others aligned at angles reminiscent of astronomical diagrams. The team's linguist spent hours in front of the walls, copying every detail. The more she observed, the more she felt she was not looking at a dead language, but a system of codes that had not yet been deciphered. "This is not a writing to be read with the eyes," she said in one of the accounts, "but to be understood with another part of the mind." This phrase was recorded in the expedition's journals and has since been repeated by everyone who came into contact with the images. The idea that the symbols were not only information, but also a way of transmitting energy or hidden knowledge, transformed the research into something that went beyond the limits of traditional science. Most intriguing was the repetition of humanoid figures alongside these signs. These were no ordinary gods, represented as crowned men or sacred animals. They were beings of varying proportions, with elongated heads, large eyes, and bodies that resembled a fusion of human and unknown. For some, they could be exaggerated artistic representations. For others, they were records of entities that were indeed venerated as gods in the distant past. This duality, symbolic art or actual testimony, was enough to spark debate among the team members and, later, to provoke even more resistance from the academic community. Another disturbing detail was the presence of identical symbols on stone blocks positioned so that ordinary visitors would never see them. It was as if the builders wanted to hide messages not from the eyes of the common people, but from those who, in the future, dared to break the temple's seals. This discovery reinforced the idea that the structure was not only a place of worship, but also a vault of forbidden knowledge, guarded in an almost ritualistic manner. As the days passed, the feeling of strangeness only grew. Some researchers reported recurring dreams of luminous patterns similar to those engraved on the walls. Others claimed to feel vibrations when they ran their hands over the symbols, as if a residual energy were imbued in the stone. These reports were met with skepticism from the group, but were recorded as further proof that the temple was not just a dead structure, but something that still seemed alive. In the end, the symbols brought no answers. They only raised more questions. Who created them? What message were they intended to convey? And above all, why would so many later civilizations have gone to great lengths to ensure this temple remained forgotten? As the days progressed, work at the temple ceased to be merely an excavation and became an unsettling experience. Small events began to recur, always subtle but disturbing. Flashlights would fail to work precisely when they were pointed at certain walls, as if the light were repelled by the engraved symbols. Electronic equipment, which had worked normally in the camp, would stop responding when taken into the underground structure. At first, the team tried to attribute these phenomena to technical failures common in inhospitable environments, but their frequency became impossible to ignore. The silence of the desert, which at night usually conveyed a sense of peace, began to be interrupted by strange noises. Reports described the sound of footsteps echoing through the still closed corridors, even when everyone was gathered in the same space. Others claimed to hear distant murmurs, as if ancient voices were trying to penetrate the stone. These reports divided the team. Some laughed, saying it was just fatigue and the mind suggestion. Others kept their fears silent, worried about being ridiculed. But everyone, without exception, began to feel they were not alone. The turning point occurred one early morning. One of the young archaeologists responsible for guarding the camp reported seeing a greenish light emerging from within the temple entrance. He described it as a diffuse glow that seemed to pulse as if it were alive. He ran to call the others, but when they returned together, the light had disappeared, leaving only darkness. The incident was never explained, but from that moment on, an invisible tension built between everyone. Some began to believe that the temple was not just a ruin, but a kind of guardian of secrets that should not be touched. Beyond the physical phenomena, there were also psychological effects. Many began to dream of recurring images, endless corridors, humanoid figures observing from a distance, voices calling out each researcher's name. These dreams didn't seem like mere figments of imagination, as they were described similarly by different team members, even without them speaking to each other. It was as if the temple itself were communicating, using the explorers' minds as a gateway. The escalation of tension reached its peak when part of the ceiling of one of the chambers suddenly collapsed, nearly hitting two researchers. Strangely enough, there was no prior sign of cracks or structural weakness. For some, it was simply an accident. For others, it was a clear warning that they were overstepping their bounds. The linguist, who had been sensitive to the environment from the start, was the first to voice what everyone feared. This temple doesn't want to be opened. This climate of fear and fascination intensified with each new discovery. The expedition was torn between the scientific obligation to press forward and the survival instinct that urged retreat. But what no one knew at that moment was that the pinnacle of revelation was yet to come, and that the signs thus far were merely foreshadowings of what truly lay hidden within the depths of the temple. The moment of revelation didn't happen as planned, but almost as if it were inevitable. After weeks of mounting tension, the team managed to open a passageway that led to an even deeper chamber, unlike anything they had explored before. The air inside was heavy, dense, as if it had remained untouched for millennia. The walls were not only engraved with symbols, but entirely covered, forming a continuous mosaic of codes, images, and geometric shapes that seemed to pulse in the lantern light. The environment conveyed the sense of not just a physical space, but also a space of power, a place built to guard, protect, or perhaps imprison something. In the center of the chamber was a stone structure similar to an altar. On it lay fragments of a material unlike any known rock in the region. Its surface was smooth, almost metallic, reflecting light unusually as if it were a distorted mirror. But what truly froze the researchers was what was engraved on this altar: figures representing gigantic beings, with features that in no way resembled human. Some had elongated heads, others multiple arms, and all were depicted in a position of worship as if receiving offerings from much smaller peoples around them. The linguist approached to observe the symbols displayed alongside the figures. Her eyes scanned each line, and her expression revealed a mixture of fascination and terror. She murmured that some of the signs repeated themselves in different blocks, as if forming an intentional sequence. They weren't mere ornaments. They seemed like instructions, or perhaps records of events. The idea that this could represent an entire narrative, lost and hidden for millennia, made everyone realize the weight of what they were looking at. It was at that moment that something happened. One of the young researchers, upon touching the metal surface, reported feeling a vibration run through his arm, as if the stone still carried some kind of energy. He recoiled in alarm, and the group fell into absolute silence. No one wanted to admit it out loud, but the shared feeling was clear. This place was not dead. Somehow, the temple was still alive. The emotional climax came when one of the altar blocks revealed a central inscription unlike the others. There, in deeper strokes, was depicted a scene of destruction. Human figures being crushed, cities in flames, and the same giant beings watching from above. It was as if it were a warning or a memory of a time when these forbidden gods had walked among men. The shock was immediate. This was not just a place of worship, but perhaps a historical record of something humanity should never remember. In that instant, it became clear to everyone that they were not just standing before an archaeological ruin. They were confronted with an enigma that transcended the very notions of history, science, and myth. The hidden temple had finally shown its true face, and what it revealed was not only disturbing, it was forbidden. After the revelation in the central chamber, the expedition was never the same. The symbols, the humanoid figures, and the strange energy that seemed to emanate from the altar left the researchers silent, each digesting the experience in their own way. But as the first notes began to be organized, a series of questions arose, opening up more mysteries than answers. The most obvious of these was, who built that temple? There were no records of any known civilization in the region, with architectural capabilities or symbolic knowledge comparable to what they found. No recorded culture had worked with such perfectly fitted blocks, or produced representations so far removed from traditional human iconography. The second question was even more disturbing. Why hide it? If the structure was built to honor or record something so great, why seal it so carefully, to the point of nearly disappearing from history? The fact that the outer walls bore no symbols and that all the messages faced inward indicated a clear intention of concealment. It was not a temple meant to be seen by the people. It was a vault, a secret destined to be buried, perhaps out of fear, perhaps out of obedience to a higher order. Who made this decision? Was it the builders themselves, repentant of what they had created, or later peoples who understood the danger of keeping such knowledge accessible? Another question that resonated among researchers concerned the beings depicted. Were they merely mythological figures, figments of the imagination of a lost culture, or were they visual records of real encounters? Many traditionalist scholars, when confronted with similar images in other contexts, tend to classify them as religious metaphors. But the precision of the proportions, the anatomical details, and the repetition of the same features in different blocks suggested something more concrete, almost documentary. If these truly were records of beings who walked among men, who were they? Where did they come from? And above all, where did they go? The very nature of the symbols also raised questions. Unlike ordinary writing, which conveys simple ideas, the temple code seemed to operate on multiple levels. as if combining mathematics, astronomy, and spirituality into a single system. This led some to speculate that they might be instructions, perhaps even formulas related to unknown forces. The linguist, though fascinated, confessed that she was afraid to continue deciphering. She said that certain patterns gave the impression of being incomplete, as if the rest of the message were elsewhere, waiting to be pieced together. What if complete deciphering revealed something we shouldn't know? Finally, there was the most uncomfortable question of all. Who is trying to prevent this story from coming to light? The silence of the universities, the suppression of news reports, and the lack of official interest in investigating the site didn't seem like simple scientific neglect. There seemed to be a collective decision not to address this issue. The temple, after all, didn't just challenge archaeology. It challenged the very narrative of who we are and where we come from. These questions remained unanswered, and perhaps that was the true enigma of the Temple of the Forbidden Gods. Not what it revealed, but what still remains hidden. The hidden Temple of the Forbidden Gods remains to this day an enigma suspended between myth and reality. For some, it's just another misinterpreted ruin, an unimportant fragment given the shape of legend by the fertile imagination of explorers. For others, it's concrete proof that human history is much older, more complex, and more disturbing than we dare admit. Regardless of which side you choose to believe, the fact is that the silence surrounding the discovery speaks louder than any official explanation. When institutions rush to deny it, when newspapers take down news, when symbols remain untouched because no one dares to decipher them, the mystery becomes even more powerful. Perhaps the most impressive thing is not the temple itself, but what it represents. Every sealed stone, every symbol hidden within the walls, every record of beings that don't fit into our chronology reminds us that the truth may have been carefully buried. Not because it was irrelevant, but precisely because it was dangerous. And this leads us to an inevitable question. How many other stories have been erased in the same way? How many discoveries have been silenced so that the world could continue to believe in a single version of reality? The temple, in its ancient silence, seems to laugh at our modern arrogance. While we build libraries, laboratories, and sophisticated theories, it remains there, guarding knowledge we may never decipher. No matter how many instruments we bring, how many satellites map the Earth, or how many computers attempt to translate its symbols, there will always be something beyond our comprehension. It's as if the temple itself were a reminder that humanity doesn't control the past, only interprets fragments of it, and that some truths, no matter how much we try to illuminate them, insist on remaining in the shadows. And so, we are left only to reflect. If the Temple of the Forbidden Gods has indeed been discovered, we are not faced with a simple archaeological question. We are faced with an existential provocation. Are we ready to face what has been hidden? For sometimes, the greatest danger lies not in finding the answer, but in accepting that it contradicts everything we have been taught to believe. Perhaps that's why this enigma still defies archaeology, because it's not just a matter of stone and sand, but of identity, origin, and destiny. Perhaps the temple builders knew this when they decided to hide it. Perhaps they understood that certain truths can only be revealed when the human heart is prepared. And the big question is, are we ready now? What do you think? Do you believe this temple really exists and was hidden to protect humanity from forbidden knowledge? Or do you think it's all just myth and exaggeration? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your voice is part of this mystery, and perhaps together we can decipher what the past still insists on hiding.